Hey everyone, welcome to Our Small Footprint. My name is Nyssa. If you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Today's video is the second lot of days of the food prep, meal prep, freezer, preserving, all that sort of stuff after the August 6-week grocery haul. So I'm doing the voiceover straight after the other one, which is so people who watch every video is going to see that I'm in exactly the same spot, but that is just the way it's got to be at the moment. So this is the second lot of days post a 6-week grocery haul. For people who are just joining, we are, as I said, a family of 8. We live 4 hours away from where I do my groceries, so I only do groceries every 6 weeks. And it takes me 2 days to do them. I do fruit and veg store, Costco, Butcher, Coles, Woolworths, Aldi, and I normally do Kmart and Bunnings and all those sorts of things as well. And then I record these videos because the biggest question I get when I say that I shop every 6 weeks is, how do you make it last? How do you make that food last the 6 weeks? Now, of course, there is adaptations to how you eat to make food last 6 weeks. We don't always have fresh fruit at the end of the 6 weeks, but we have plenty on the shelves. So there's some variables there that do that. But there is a certain way that you've got to deal with the food to make sure that it lasts the 6 weeks. That nothing goes off and everything gets used appropriately and everything gets used well, and that you've still got a lot of variety and choice to eat. So what I started doing was these videos to show everyone how I did that and what I did, so that they might gain some inspiration from it and try extending their groceries. Because one of the things for us that saved us so much money on our groceries, guinea fowl are coming to say hello. If it's not one animal, it's another. The thing that really made us save money on our groceries was extending the time between grocery shops, making do with what we've got. There is plenty of food still in the house at the end of the 6 weeks. It just might not be the food that you would reach for, the simple food or the food that you would necessarily choose, but there's still plenty to eat. And so part of the way we save money was by forcing ourselves to look at food slightly differently and make the most of what we had over that 6 weeks and not just run out and grab fresh stuff. So, as I said, this is the second lot of days of food prep, and I will get on with it. We're starting with chicken thighs. So as I say most of the time in these videos, you have to decide what you're going to use based on what has the shortest best before date and what goes off quickest. In the scope of meats, chicken is the thing that needs to be dealt with fairly quickly. So we tend to eat a lot of chicken in the first couple of weeks and prepare the chicken for later eating in the month, because it needs to be used first. Beef, pork, all that sort of stuff, it has a longer best before date and can be left in the fridge longer than the chicken can, generally speaking. So the first thing I did was cut up a tray of the thighs. I think I bought 4 trays of chicken thighs, so I'm dealing with 1 for the moment. Each tray is around about 2.2 kilos. I'm going to do this one in a buttermilk marinade. So we did this last month with the tenderloins that I got, and we really enjoyed it. So I wanted to try it with some thigh chunks, because these are a fave when we deep fry them with the lemon chung sauce. So the thighs have so much flavour and have a slightly better texture than breasts, we find. So we're hoping that we like the thighs this way too. So I put the full tray cut up into the buttermilk mix, which for me is milk kefir. So that is our, soured milk of choice in this house. So I strained all the grains out of the kefir that had been fermenting and put fresh milk back in to ferment on the bench. So we use cow's milk, fresh cow's milk for our kefir, and it is one of the things that we do buy from town on a regular basis because we only need it for kefir. So it's not worth me purchasing it in any sort of quantity when I do the shopping. Better off that when Darryl goes into town to buy animal feed and stuff like that he just grabs a 2 litre or a 3 litre. We used to do a larger volume of milk at a time. We had a 3.8 litre jar and we'd just do a whole 3 litre in it. When our fridge carked it, one of the kefir jar went a bit funny. It got some calm yeast on the top of it, so I had to scrape that off and get some clean grains from underneath and start with a smaller batch, and we gave the rest to the chickens. So at the moment we're still coddling the kefir grains a little bit till they can multiply a bit more, so we're just doing it in 1 litre batches at the moment. So strained it, refed it, and put it aside to be fermented again. And then I added some garlic powder, onion powder, salt and pepper to the kefir, and then just threw all the chicken in there. I put the lid on it and it'll sit in the fridge for like 24 hours before I deal with it. Could be 48. The best before date on this is a couple of days out still, so it can sit in the fridge for a couple of days if need be in that kefir, but 24 hours is what I generally aim for. Do that today to cook up tomorrow for dinner and that sort of thing. I then pulled the other 2 trays of thighs out and sliced them up as well. I like to slice them up because I find that they cook quicker and they defrost quicker if I'm freezing them. If we have skin on thighs, we tend to cook them as is, but because these skinless ones are what we end up buying because they're cheap, and they go much further if I slice them up. We use much less weight per meal of chicken if we're using the little slivers than if we're using whole thighs per person sort of thing. It can be sprinkled through a meal rather than eaten as a whole item. The first thing I did with some of it was a couple of bags of the soy, garlic, ginger marinade that I do for making the potato starch fried chicken serving that I serve with lemon chung. So I did 2 bags up of about 1 kilo each. I just put the kilo into the vacuum seal bags and then put some soy sauce, some garlic and some ginger into those vacuum seal bags and massaged it through, sealed them up. You want to make sure that you clean the tops of the bags where up to the seal because some liquid gets in there even if you have it on moist mode. And I badly need to upgrade my vacuum sealer. It's an Aldi one and it's working, but it's very temperamental and sometimes it doesn't seal properly and we end up having to cut parts off bags and things like that. It also needs quite a delay between sealing bags because it overheats. So I'm looking to buy myself one of the Louvel ones at some point because it doesn't have that cool down period between the sealing and stuff like that, but I haven't yet. I don't, it's not a need, it's a want. So at the moment this one is still working, generally speaking, most of the time, so I'll wait and I'll order a new one when I have the funds to do so and it's not going to eat into any other purchases, and I'll share it when I do. With the rest, probably 2.5 odd kilos, I did my standard marinade that we all love. So cowboy candy. Normally I'd put smoked paprika and all the individual spices on here, but I've actually run out of smoked paprika at the moment. So I use some of my homemade bacon seasoning, which has like predominantly smoked paprika in it, and all those other spices. I wouldn't normally add sugar to the marinade because of the sweetness of the cowboy candy, but it won't hurt this time, that bit of sugar in the bacon seasoning. I mixed it through really well. I added some more ground garlic and onion just because I felt like it needed a bit more. Once it was all massaged through and coated really well, I put it aside for about half an hour just for that marinade to moisten up, the sugar to dissolve that was in the dry rub and things like that, so that it would all be well coated. I fried it all up using the cast iron pans, so I just put both cast iron pans on, I put a little bit of fat in the pans and I fry it up. I love the way having the cowboy candy on it gives it some heat, but also the sweet and sticky edges. This will be used for many various meals over the next few days, and some will probably be frozen for later in the month. It is one of our favourite cold meats. I used to think, you know, doing chicken like this was an inefficient way of cold meat type thing, but it actually works out cheaper per kilo than buying ham most of the time. Like ham, even the cheap ham is like $15 a kilo at $12 a kilo, I think you can possibly get down to. And chicken is $10.39, $11.39 a kilo. So it actually works out to be fairly efficient cost-wise to use chicken as cold meat, so long as you cut it up nice and small and you're not eating great big hunks of it. And we tend to freeze it in bags by weight so that we know how much there is to use between everyone for a meal sort of thing. I decided to use some of that chicken that I just prepped with dinner, so we had ramen. I had these Chinese veg that needed to be used as well. I think it was pak choy this month, and they don't hold excessively long in the fridge, so there's something that we tend to use within that first week of the grocery cycle. I sliced them all up, sliced up a whole lot of broccoli as well. We got a big box of broccoli again this month, so it lasts quite well, but it still does much better at the beginning of the month than later on. The florets tend to separate and can get bits of slimy spots and things like that the longer they're sitting in that humid environment, so we tend to use it as quickly as possible right at the beginning of the month. I have talked about trying to blanch it and freeze it before. No freezer room at the moment, so for the moment we just eat it really quick. We just have some meals where we have like 3 or 4 heads of broccoli as part of the main meal, and I don't mind that because I really like broccoli, and then we get through it that way. I cooked up the Jin Mai Ling ramen noodles that we prefer. They're the 1 kilo pack for $3.10 at Coles. They are definitely our preferred ramen noodles. And I learned a trick the other day. These noodles have a horrible tendency of foaming up and overflowing the pan. Now for us it's not such a big deal because there's concrete pavers under the stove. I can easily clean them down. But if in a standard kitchen when that's on a stovetop, that would kind of suck. So that starchy, sticky water spread all over everything. So if when the noodles just start foaming, you add about 1/4 cup of cold water, it takes it just off the boil and the foaming stops. So these noodles take about a 4-minute cook time, and I found that I had to do it 2 or 3 times in that period of time, and it worked wonderfully. No overflowing, the noodles were perfectly cooked, and it was a whole lot easier. So it was really nice. I'd sauteed up the broccoli, the Asian greens, and reheated some of that chicken in a pan while I was cooking the noodles. And then I made that TikTok or whatever it was viral at some point, ramen style dish to have it with. So egg yolks and then the flavor sachets from ramen noodles if that's what you're using, or in my case a bouillon powder or a seasoning mix. I think I'm going to try making up my own sort of like base seasoning mix for ramen so that we can use it for this dish, and then a few good dollops of mayo, all mixed together. I tempered it with some of the noodle water so the eggs wouldn't scramble. You can do similar just by adding the noodles, but the egg yolks had congealed quite a bit, so I wanted to use the whisk because adding the noodles is just not going to be as even. So I put like a cup of hot noodle water in and used the whisk to temper that egg mix so that I wasn't going to break the eggs. And then I added the noodles, mixing them through until it was a sort of nice and wet, almost soupy texture. I just served the noodles in the bottom of the bowl with the veg and the chicken over the top. So it was a very simple meal, super tasty, but very simple meal, one that everyone's really enjoying at the moment. The next day we had that chicken that I had cooked up in the fridge, so I decided to cook up some small soft flatbreads to have with it for lunch. This is my standard yeasted recipe. It's not sourdough, it's just standard yeasted recipe. I have 40 to 50 gram balls and I roll them out and fry them off in the cast iron pan. You can do them really flat like tortillas, or you can do them like this where they're sort of like a puffy sort of a soft taco type thing. It really depends on what you're using them for. I find that when we're doing something like using chicken, if they're the smaller size, then you use less chicken per bread, so I do them slightly smaller weight and the slightly smaller soft taco type shape, because if you make them into big tortilla things, people tend to want to put too much chicken on them and you're using too much chicken per meal for that purpose. We served it with some fresh made mayo, the chicken, some sliced tomatoes because we bought the boxes of tomatoes, so we had tomatoes to use. I had a bit of crumbled cheese on mine. I gave the kids a platter as per usual, so a couple of the breads each, a bowl of some chicken, sliced tomato, there was lettuce I believe, and sauce and mayo of their choice. I think there was some shredded cabbage too to be used as coleslaw type thing. So all that sort of stuff I tend to just put it all on the table and they can make them themselves. I decided to bake a cake this day as well. I used some of my canned boiled whole oranges and made the chocolate orange almond cake that we really like. I should probably share this as its own video at some point. I shared last year when I was canning up all the oranges that this was the main purpose for it, but I don't think I ever came back and showed the cake in detail. So it's been wonderful having the oranges on the shelf and be able to make this cake up on a whim rather than having to boil the oranges when I want to make the cake. It's a favourite of the household. Everyone loves it. Sometimes I make it chocolate orange, sometimes just plain orange. It's a lovely moist cake. It's not overly sweet, but it's really bright and citrusy, and it's gluten-free for anyone that needs to be gluten-free, and dairy-free as well. So it's just a really nice, easy, dense, chocolatey orange cake that we really enjoy. So having those jars on the shelf are wonderful. For dinner that night, I planned to have some of the lamb. We bought the half-side tray discounted from the butcher because I hadn't had lamb in ages. I don't know whether it was because I was sick still or what, but it was kind of bland, to be honest. I remember lamb being very super strong and was really looking forward to that as a change, and it was very just meh. We were going to use it regardless, but it just really wasn't quite what I was wanting from it. So because we aren't doing well power-wise enough lately to use the slower cooker, I decided to pressure cook it. I cut some really big slits in the roast to shove garlic in, but I'm using this giant elephant garlic and it was really hard to get the slits big enough to put chunks in there. I should have just diced it up smaller, I don't know. But anyway, so they all kept falling out. Going in the pressure cooker anyway, and it's all going to get the flavour in there regardless. I sprinkled it generously with the seasoned smoked citrus rosemary salt, and put it and some of the other pieces that were on the tray that were less desired pieces into the pressure cooker. So I put the rack in the bottom of the pressure cooker, a couple of cups of water underneath the rack so that nothing would burn before it has a chance to heat up and things like that. And pressure cooked it for 90 minutes. I find 90 minutes is a good time for something like a lamb. I don't want it sliceable, I want it to just fall off the bone. So that's what I'm aiming for with the 90 minutes. I had some starter that needed using so I could feed it, so I decided to do some sourdough crackers up. It's a well-loved snack in this house, but kind of time-consuming to make compared to how quickly they're eaten, especially with the limitations of how much I can fit in the barbecue at a time. It definitely takes quite a while to get through all the dough and get it all cooked up, and then it's eaten in a third, a quarter, an eighth of the time it takes to make them, that's what it's cooked for, but you know, sometimes, anyway. So I might need to do a video on these start to finish as well. There's heaps of variations in flavour that you can make to suit your tastes. I really like them really thin. I like to use my pasta roller to make them really thin, but Darryl prefers them thicker and sort of puffy. So I make them various different ways depending on what I feel like. Because the kids are tolerating a little bit more dairy in their diet these days, though I'm not pushing it because I don't want the repercussions in case it goes badly. But I had some of this Grana Padano cheese, which is a very hard cheese, low dairy content, but super tasty. I put a couple of tablespoons in one of the batches of dough to see if we could get a bit of a cheesy flavour to them without using any sort of cheese that's too cheesy. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it makes sense to me. So I did it a few different ways. I hand rolled it out to the sides of the silicone liner and used the Thermomix cracker cutter for some, which is a really nifty tool. It scores the crackers in a triangle pattern and then you just break them apart once they're cooked. It gives them that separation so that they cook around the edges a little bit more evenly, but still doesn't take up heaps of room on the tray, and it means that you can sort of like score it on the tray and put it in the oven, which can save time sometimes. I also did some in my usual way, which is with the pasta, the wavy cutter side of the pasta cutter. These really long thins are good for dipping into stuff, I find, though I normally run it through the pasta roller first, and I didn't this time, so they did end up a little bit thicker. I just gradually, around everything else, cooked off tray after tray of them. They don't take long each, maybe 15-20 minutes, and I like to spray them with a little water or oil and sprinkle them with toppings sometimes too. I do like everything bagel seasoning on them, flaked salt. I've even done like a powdered vinegar and salt mix for Darryl, who loves anything and everything salt and vinegar. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with these. I make them dairy free, so I do them with an olive oil base, not with a butter base. And yeah, they're a really great thing to eat, but they're just, yeah, a bit time consuming. While I was cooking those off in batches, I started on sides for dinner. I decided to do a potato bake. I really wanted to use my Thermomix cutter to cut the potatoes, but I couldn't find the blade anywhere. This is the perils of putting the dishes away being the chore of the small boys. So I hand cut all the potatoes into slices. I am having to peel my potatoes at the moment because I bought brushed Dutch cream potatoes and they're just too hard to get clean with our limited water. It's much more efficient to peel them. I made up a white sauce in the Thermomix while I was slicing the potatoes. One of my most favourite but simple things about a Thermomix is the ability to make things like custards and white sauces and that with very little input. So I can throw all my stuff into the Thermomix, turn it on, and then do whatever I need to do. So I use some Nuttallix because I've got Nuttallix this month, flour, coconut cream, stock, some mustard, a tablespoon or so of that Grana Padano because I still had it out, some salt and pepper, a bit of onion and garlic powder, turn it on and just let it go. And then I decided to do a tray of broccoli in the same sauce, seeing as I had all this broccoli to get through as well, so I cut that up and filled a baking tray with that as well. Once the white sauce was done, I poured it over the two trays. I actually ended up adding a bit of stock to the trays as well because I hadn't really planned on doing 2 full trays, and there wasn't quite enough sauce to make sure that the vegetables cooked in that liquid. So I just added a cup or 2 of stock to the trays as well to bring the liquid quantity up a little bit. I don't mind if it's a little bit runny. We're having it with roast lamb anyway. I then grabbed a few of the bagels from the other day that hadn't been eaten yet, turned them into breadcrumbs in the Thermomix. I really love bagels as breadcrumbs because they have a great texture and you get all that everything bagel seasoning in there as well. I added a sprinkle of bacon seasoning and a drizzle of olive oil into the breadcrumbs as well, which helps them to crisp up and brown up in the oven, having that bit of oil in there, and sprinkled them over the top of the 2 bakes and put them in the oven once the crackers were all done. It doesn't look like I got any footage of the lamb once it was cooked or the bakes, and that's probably because someone else served it, to be honest. Sometimes I do all this prep all day, get all the food sorted, it's all there, and by the time it's time for dinner, I just sit there and go, Darryl, the food will be ready. Go and serve it up. And of course, he doesn't film it because he doesn't think about it, and I don't go out there to film it while he's doing that sort of thing. So I don't appear to have any footage of it. So the lamb was lovely. As I said, it was a little bit bland, but it was lovely. It was all full off the bone, so we had chunks of lamb that was just melt in your mouth with the potato bake and the broccoli bake, and ate that as for dinner. And this is what the crackers look like all cooked up. So they've got a great texture. They've got a really crisp texture. As I said, I prefer them thinner than thick, but a lot of them like them thick. They're great for dips. So a couple of years ago, I made this really, really delicious dip up this recipe for, and had cream cheese and bacon and all sorts of things. So good. But that was back when Darryl was eating dairy, and now he doesn't eat dairy anymore. So I'm going to have to try and figure something else out to make as a dip for this summer, I think, because fresh tomatoes, like the really big beef steak tomatoes from the garden with them dip, and the fresh sourdough crackers were one of our favorite things, and fresh pesto if I had basil and things like that. And we've fingers crossed that the garden's going to work this year and we'll have all of those things to have. So I'm going to have to figure out a few different dips, I think, to try and make up to dairy-free ones. I haven't really done dairy-free dips too much. We do the dairy-free cashew cheeses and stuff, which could be used as a that sort of thing, I suppose, but I'll have to have a think about it and do some of that stuff. So that was the second lot of days in the August 6-weekly grocery period. I hope some stuff there tickled your fancy, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks for joining me again, guys, and see you next time.